The chair scraped hard against the wooden floor as every eye turned toward him, and instead of answering, the cowboy stepped away from the table and followed the woman who had just walked out, leaving one question hanging in the air. What did he see that no one else did? The lantern light flickered low as boots hit the floor behind him, sharp and fast. "You walk out that door, you don't come back to this table," Barrett Caldwell said, voice tight. Duncan didn't stop. The screen door creaked open, letting in the cold night wind and the smell of wet earth. Out by the horse pens, Ivy was already tightening a worn leather strap, hands steady despite the voices rising behind her. She didn't turn when he stepped closer, just kept working, like she had already made up her mind about something no one inside had noticed. Duncan paused, watching the way she checked the knot twice before letting go. "You leaving?" he asked. She finally looked at him, calm, certain. "Are you?" she said. And for a moment, neither of them moved. "Tell me, what would you have done standing right there?" The wind had been pushing down from the hills since late afternoon, dragging dust across the yard and rattling the loose hinge on the Caldwell front gate. By the time the lamps were lit inside the main house, the air carried that dry Wyoming chill that settled into your bones and stayed there. Inside, everything was warm, too warm. Barrett Caldwell's parlor smelled of roasted beef, polished wood, and the faint bite of strong coffee poured into thick white cups. The long table had been dressed with care, linen pressed flat, silver laid out in neat lines, plates that didn't see daylight except on nights like this. Clara Caldwell sat near the head of the table, her back straight, hands folded in her lap like she'd practiced it. The green dress she wore caught the lamplight every time she turned her head. Not once did she look unsure. Across from her, Duncan Hale sat heavy in his chair, shoulders filling more space than the furniture seemed built for. His coat hung on the backrest behind him, dust still clinging to the hem. He hadn't bothered brushing it off. He held his coffee but hadn't taken a sip. Barrett Caldwell talked enough for both of them. "You won't find better grazing land west of the ridge," Barrett said, carving into the roast with steady hands. "And with the spring melt, the North Creek runs clean. Reliable water. That's what matters." Duncan nodded once. Not agreement, just acknowledgement. Clara smiled lightly, the way a person does when they know exactly when to do it. "My father says you've been riding the southern range," she said, voice even. "You must have seen how open it is. Plenty of room to expand." Duncan glanced at her, but it didn't stay there. His eyes moved past her, slow, like he was looking for something that wasn't at the table. A spoon clinked against a cup. Someone cleared their throat. The sound of the wind outside pressed faintly against the walls. Then the kitchen door opened. It wasn't loud, just a quick push, the hinge letting out a short groan. A gust of colder air slipped into the room, carrying the smell of hay and damp wood. Ivy Brooks stepped in with a bundle of split firewood held against her hip. Her sleeves were rolled past her wrists, and there was dirt along the edge of her cuff. One strand of hair had come loose near her temple, catching the light before she brushed it back without thinking. She paused just inside the doorway, not frozen, just aware. Every head at the table had turned. Barrett's jaw tightened. "Use the back entrance," he said, not raising his voice, but it carried. Ivy shifted the wood in her arms. "Fire was dropping," she said. "Didn't want the room to go cold." No apology in it, just fact. She crossed the edge of the room, boots quiet on the wooden floor, and set the wood near the hearth. A few small chips scattered across the clean boards. She crouched to adjust the logs, feeding the fire with steady hands. The flames caught quick, rising again with a soft crackle. For a moment, that was the only sound. Duncan hadn't moved. His gaze stayed on her, not sharp, not intrusive, just steady, like he was watching how she worked. The way she placed each piece of wood, the way she didn't rush. Clara's smile didn't falter, but it didn't deepen either. Barrett cleared his throat. "That will be all," he said. Ivy stood, brushing her hands once against her trousers. She gave a small nod, not to anyone in particular, and turned toward the door. "Miss Brooks," Clara said, her voice light but deliberate. Ivy paused. Clara tilted her head slightly. "Thank you." It sounded polite. It also sounded like something said to a servant in a house that wasn't hers. Ivy met her eyes for half a second. "You're welcome." Then she stepped out, the door closing behind her with a soft click. The room settled again, but not the same way. Duncan finally took a sip of his coffee. It had gone lukewarm. Barrett set down his knife. "Now," he said, forcing a smile back onto his face. "Where were we?" No one answered right away. Clara spoke again, picking up the thread like she'd been trained to. "We were discussing the northern pasture," she said, "and the possibility of—" Duncan set his cup down. The sound was quiet, but it cut through her words. Barrett looked at him. "Something on your mind, Mr. Hale?" Duncan leaned back slightly in his chair. The wood creaked under his weight. He looked at Barrett, then at Clara, then toward the door Ivy had just walked through. "You've got good land," he said. Barrett's smile returned, quick. "I know I do." "And you've got plans for it," Duncan added. "That's the idea." A pause. Clara folded her hands tighter in her lap. Barrett's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "We don't need to circle this all night, Mr. Hale. You know why you're here. My daughter knows. I believe we understand each other." The air tightened again. Duncan didn't answer right away. He glanced down at the table, at the untouched plate in front of him, then back up. "You want me to choose," he said. Barrett nodded once. "That's the plain truth of it." Clara's chin lifted just a little higher. Duncan exhaled through his nose. Not frustration. Something closer to thought settling into place. Then he spoke. "She knows this land better than anyone here." Silence. It didn't land at first. Not fully. Barrett blinked. "I'm sorry?" Duncan didn't shift. "The woman who just came through that door," he said. "She knows your fences, your water, your horses, probably better than the men you've got working them." Clara's fingers tightened. Barrett stared at him like he'd misheard. "You're choosing her?" he said, the words sharp now, cutting through the room. No one moved. The lamp flame flickered slightly, casting shadows that stretched long across the walls. Duncan didn't raise his voice. He didn't look away. "I said what I saw," he replied. Barrett's chair scraped against the floor as he leaned forward. "That's not what this is about." Duncan met his gaze. "Maybe that's the problem." Clara stood then, slow and controlled, the legs of her chair barely making a sound. Her smile was gone now, replaced by something quieter. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. "You're mistaken," she said. "About her." Duncan shook his head once. "No," he said. "I'm not." The room held its breath. Outside, the wind pressed harder against the walls. Inside, no one spoke. And somewhere beyond that closed kitchen door, the fire burned a little stronger. Duncan Hale stood up without asking to be excused. His chair scraped back slow against the floor. Not loud, but enough. Enough to draw every eye again. Barrett Caldwell's hand tightened around his glass. "Mr. Hale," he said, voice measured now, "we're not finished here." Duncan reached for his coat. "You are," he said. Clara didn't move. She sat there, still as the china in front of her, watching him like she was waiting for him to correct himself. to turn this into something polite, something expected. He didn't. The front door opened with a push of his shoulder, and the cold came in again, sharp and clean. By the time it shut behind him, the room felt smaller. Out in the yard, the wind had picked up. It carried the smell of hay and the faint iron scent of the corrals down the slope. A lantern swung on its hook near the barn, light rocking back and forth. Duncan crossed the yard without hesitation. He didn't head for the bunkhouse, didn't head for the gate. He went straight toward the barn. Inside it was warmer. The kind of warmth that came from animals and hay packed thick along the walls. A horse shifted in its stall, snorting softly. Leather creaked somewhere in the dim. Ivy Brooks stood near the far end, her back to him. She had a brush in one hand, working slow along the flank of a bay mare. The horse leaned into it, half asleep. Ivy didn't rush. Same steady rhythm she'd used by the fire. She didn't turn when he came in. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Duncan stopped a few steps behind her. "Neither should you." The brush moved again, down, then up. "This is where I work," she said. "Different thing." Duncan leaned one hand against the wooden post beside him. "Caldwell doesn't want you in that house tonight." Ivy gave a quiet breath through her nose. Not quite a laugh. "He don't want me in most places." Silence settled between them. Not awkward. Just there. A horse stamped once. The lantern light flickered. "You meant that?" she asked after a moment. Duncan didn't pretend not to understand. "Yeah." The brush stopped. She turned then, just enough to look at him over her shoulder. Her eyes didn't search his face. They held it. "You don't even know me," she said. "I know what I saw." "That's not the same thing." "No," he agreed. "It isn't." She set the brush down on a ledge, wiped her hands on a cloth tucked into her belt. There was dirt along her knuckles that hadn't come out. "What you saw," she said, "was someone doing their job." "What I saw," Duncan replied, "was the only person in that room who wasn't pretending." That landed, not hard, but it stayed. Ivy looked away first, back toward the mare. She reached out and ran her hand along the horse's neck, slower now. "You don't do things halfway, do you?" she said. Duncan shook his head. "No. That's going to cost you." He didn't answer that. Outside, a loose board knocked against the barn wall in the wind. A steady, hollow sound. "You got business with Caldwell," she went on. "Land, water. Whatever it is, men like you work out at tables like that." "Had," Duncan said. That made her turn again. "You just walked away from it?" "Didn't feel like a deal." She studied him then, not quick, not shallow, like she was measuring something she hadn't expected to weigh. "You always decide things that fast?" she asked. "Not always." "Tonight?" "Yeah." Ivy stepped away from the stall, closing the half door behind her. The mare settled back, chewing quiet. "You don't understand what that house runs on," she said. "What people expect." "Maybe I don't." "No," she said. "You don't." She walked past him, heading toward the wide barn door. He didn't move to block her. At the threshold, she stopped. The yard stretched out in front of them, pale under the rising moon. The fence line cut dark against the hills. Somewhere out there, a gate banged loose. "North pasture's drying out," she said, almost to herself. "You ride out far enough, you'll see it. Fence posts leaning, water line cracking near the bend." Duncan followed her gaze. "You been checking it?" "Every morning before sunup," she said. "Someone has to." He nodded once. "Show me." She looked at him again. This time, there was something else there. Not surprise. Not quite. Tomorrow, he added. First light. Ivy held his eyes a second longer, like she was deciding if this was worth her time. Then she gave a small nod. You ride hard? Enough. Bring gloves, she said. Wires splitting near the north line. It'll cut you if you're not paying attention. A corner of Duncan's mouth shifted. Not a smile. Close. I pay attention, he said. She pushed the barn door open wider. The wind slipped in again, colder now. Good, she said. You're going to need to. She stepped out into the night without waiting for him. Duncan stood there a moment longer, listening to the quiet settle back around the stalls, the slow breathing of the horses, the soft rustle of hay. Then he followed. Out past the swinging lantern, past the gate that wouldn't quite stay shut, toward a stretch of land no one had bothered to mention at the dinner table, and for the first time that night, it felt like he was walking toward something real. Morning came thin and pale over Black Ridge Basin. Frost clung to the fence rails, and the water bucket outside the barn had a skin of ice across the top. A rooster called somewhere beyond the ridge, slow and tired. Duncan was already saddling his horse when Ivy stepped out from the side of the barn. She didn't greet him, just checked the cinch on her saddle, tugged once, then swung up in one smooth motion. They rode without talking. The ground sloped north, rough and uneven, patches of dry grass breaking through frozen dirt. The fence line came into view after 20 minutes, posts leaning, wire slack in places where it should have been tight. Ivy slowed her mare. There, she said, nodding ahead. Duncan followed her gaze. One section had collapsed entirely. The wire sagged low enough for cattle to drift through if they wanted. He dismounted. Gloves on, like she'd told him. He reached for the wire, testing the tension. It gave too easily. Been like this long? He asked. 3 weeks, she said. You told Caldwell? She gave a small shrug. I said it needed fixing. And? He said he'd get to it. Duncan didn't answer. He moved down the line, checking each post, each joint. The damage wasn't from one storm. It was neglect, slow and steady. Ivy watched him work for a moment, then slid down from her saddle and started gathering loose wire. No orders, no questions, just work. They moved together without speaking, passing tools back and forth, straightening what they could. At one point, Duncan caught the edge of a split wire. It scraped across his glove, enough to make him pause. Ivy noticed. Keep your hand low, she said. Don't pull against it. Let it come to you. He adjusted, tried again. It held. They worked until the sun climbed higher, burning off the frost. At the crest of the ridge, they stopped. Below them, the land stretched wide and quiet. A thin line of water cut through the basin, narrower than it should have been. Ivy wiped her hands on her trousers. That creek drops another foot by midwinter, she said. If it keeps going like this, half the herd won't make it. Duncan rested his forearms on the fence post. Caldwell planning to fix it? He's planning a wedding, she said. That landed. Duncan glanced at her. She didn't look at him, just kept her eyes on the land. You always talk like that? He asked. Like what? Like nothing's hidden. She let out a breath. Hiding things doesn't fix them. He nodded once. They rode back in silence. By the time they reached the yard, the house was already awake. Smoke curled from the chimney. Someone had opened the front windows just enough to let the air in. Clara stood on the porch. Her dress was different this morning, lighter, but her posture hadn't changed. She watched them ride in. Duncan dismounted, took his time tying off the reins. Ivy slid down beside him, but didn't step forward. Barrett Caldwell stepped out of the house, coat already on, hat pulled low. You took your time, he said. Duncan didn't answer right away. He pulled off his gloves, dusted them once against his thigh. North line's falling apart, he said. You've got water running low. Barrett's expression didn't shift. We'll manage. You won't, Duncan replied. Clara's eyes flicked between them. Barrett took a step closer. We didn't ride out there for your inspection, Mr. Hale. We had an understanding. Duncan met his gaze. You had an expectation. That's the same thing. No, Duncan said. It isn't. The air tightened again. Ivy shifted her weight slightly, just enough to feel it. Barrett's jaw set. We'll sit down tonight, he said. Finish what we started. Duncan looked past him, toward the house, then back again. We already finished it. Clara stepped forward then. Mr. Hale, she said, voice calm but firmer than before. If there's been a misunderstanding, we can correct it. That's what this is for. Duncan studied her for a moment. Then he shook his head. No misunderstanding, he said. Barrett let out a short, humorless breath. You're making a mistake. Maybe, Duncan said, but it's mine. That evening, the table was set again. Same plates, same silver, same careful arrangement. But nothing felt the same. Ivy stood in the doorway this time, not crossing the threshold. Barrett didn't ask her to come in. Clara didn't look at her. Duncan took his seat. The meal began, quiet at first. The sound of forks, the scrape of chairs. Then Barrett set his glass down harder than needed. Let's be clear, he said. We don't do half decisions in this house. Duncan didn't look up. Then don't. Barrett leaned forward. You think you can walk in here, turn everything on its head, and walk out without consequence? Duncan raised his eyes. I already walked out once. Clara's hand tightened around her fork. Barrett's voice dropped. You were here to choose my daughter. I was here to see what was real, Duncan said. And you think you found it in the stable? The word hung there. Ivy didn't move. Duncan did. He pushed his chair back and stood. The legs scraped across the floor, louder this time. Without a word, he crossed the room. Barrett watched him, something sharp behind his eyes. Clara went still. Duncan reached the doorway. He didn't touch Ivy. Didn't gesture. He just stepped aside and pulled out a chair at the end of the table. Set it square. Then looked at her. Ivy didn't move at first. The room waited. Then she stepped forward. Slow. Measured. She crossed the threshold and sat. No apology. No hesitation. The chair creaked softly under her weight. Duncan returned to his place. Barrett's face had gone pale. Clara stared at the table, not at either of them. No one spoke for a long time. The food went cold. Outside, the wind had died down. Inside, something else had broken. Later that night, the yard was quiet. Ivy stood near the hitching rail, her saddle already packed. Duncan stepped out from the barn. He didn't hurry. Where will you go? He asked. She didn't turn around. South, she said. There's work if you know where to look. He nodded once. You leaving tonight? Before sunrise. A pause. Duncan stepped closer, boots soft on the dirt. You don't have to, he said. She turned then. Not soft, not angry, just steady. I do, she said. You made your choice in there. So did you. She held his gaze. For a second, it looked like she might say something more. Then she shook her head. That's not how it works, she said. Duncan didn't argue, didn't reach for her, just stood there, hands at his sides. The lantern by the barn flickered once. Ivy turned back to her horse, and the space between them stayed exactly where it was. The sky hadn't broken yet when she came out again. A thin gray line sat low on the horizon, the kind that comes before the sun decides if it's worth rising. Frost had settled heavier overnight. It crunched under her boots as she crossed the yard. The house was still. No smoke from the chimney yet. No voices. Just the wind easing through the rails. She moved quiet, checking the saddle once more, tightening the strap, adjusting the blanket under it. Her hands knew the work, didn't need light. The bay mare shifted under her touch, ears flicking. "Easy," Ivy said low. She reached for the bridle. Hoofbeats sounded behind her, slow, not rushing. She didn't turn. Duncan rode up alongside the fence, breath coming steady from his horse in the cold air. He swung down without a word. For a moment, neither of them spoke. "You're early," he said finally. "So are you." He glanced at the packed saddle. "Still heading south?" That was the plan. A loose board knocked somewhere down the line. A gate, maybe. Duncan rested one hand on the fence rail. "North line needs finishing." She didn't answer. "Mercer land runs past that ridge, he added. "Cattle drift through there, and it won't stay quiet." That made her pause. Not much. Just enough. She slid the bridle into place, careful around the mare's ears. "Then you better fix it," she said. "Can't fix it alone." She tightened the strap. "You've got men for that." "Men don't see what you see." She stopped then, turned halfway, just enough to look at him. "You don't know that." "I do." Silence again. Then a sound carried from the far end of the property. Not wind. Something heavier. A low rumble. Movement. Duncan's head turned toward it. Ivy's followed. Across the rise near the north boundary, a cluster of dark shapes moved where they shouldn't be. Cattle. Too many of them. Moving wrong. Duncan grabbed his coat from the rail, pulling it on as he stepped toward his horse. "That's Caldwell stock." "They're crossing," Ivy said, "into Mercer land." Neither of them needed to say what that meant. Duncan swung into the saddle. "I'll get the men." "No," Ivy said. He looked down at her. "They'll ride in hot," she went on. "Mercer sees a line of riders coming. He won't wait to ask questions. They're taking cattle, or someone wants it to look like they are." That hung there. Duncan's jaw tightened. "Stay here," he said. Ivy was already mounting up. "Not happening." He exhaled once, sharp. "Ivy, you ride in with 6 men. This turns into something it doesn't need to be. And you think riding in alone fixes it?" "I think it buys time." She nudged the mare forward. Duncan watched her for half a second, then turned his horse. They rode hard. The ground opened up ahead, dipping toward the boundary where Caldwell land met Mercer's. The fence there had been patched too many times. Wire sagging low, posts crooked. The cattle had already crossed. A dozen at least. Maybe more. On the other side, 3 riders had come up from the Mercer side. They held back near the ridge, watching. Waiting. Ivy slowed her horse first. Raised one hand. Empty. Duncan pulled up beside her, not ahead. "Let me go," she said. He didn't answer. "I mean it." He looked at the riders across the line, then back at her. "You see something I don't?" "I see tracks," she said, "and they don't start here." That was enough. Duncan gave a short nod. Ivy rode forward alone. The wind carried her across the line. The Mercer riders didn't lift their rifles, didn't move. They watched her come. She stopped a few yards off, close enough to speak without raising her voice. "We're not here for trouble," she said. The man in the center, older, beard gone gray, tilted his head. Looks like your cattle say different. Not ours, she said. Not the way they got here. He glanced down at the ground. So did she. Hoofprints. Too many. Too tight. Driven, not drifting. Someone pushed them, Ivy said. Hard. The man looked up again. Why? To make it look like we did. A pause. Behind her, Duncan held his place. Didn't move forward. Didn't call out. Just watched. The older man swung down from his saddle. Walked a few steps, studying the tracks. Then another. He crouched, brushing dirt aside with his hand. Damn, he muttered. What? One of the others asked. These ain't Caldwell marks, he said. Different shoe. Ivy stepped closer, slow. You know who runs that? The man stood, eyes narrowing. Boone. The name settled between them. Silas Boone, trader, middleman, always somewhere in the middle of something. Figures, Duncan said from behind her. The Mercer man looked up at him. You're Hale. Duncan nodded once. You bring your whole crew. This would have gone different. I know. Another pause. The cattle shifted, restless but not panicked. The wind eased. Take them back, the Mercer man said finally. We'll help push them through. Ivy let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Duncan dismounted then, crossing the line without a word. Together, they worked the cattle back through the broken fence. Slow, careful, no shouting, no sudden moves, just hands and time. When it was done, the herd settled again on Caldwell land. The Mercer riders turned back toward their side. The older man gave Ivy one last look. You got eyes, he said. Don't lose that. She nodded. Duncan watched them ride off. Then he looked at Ivy. Not like before. Something steadier. You were right, he said. She brushed dust from her sleeve. About this, she replied. Not everything. He almost smiled. The sun had finally broken over the ridge. Light spread across the basin, catching the fence line, the horses, the ground where the tracks still marked what had almost happened. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Duncan picked up a length of wire. Let's fix it, he said. Ivy stepped beside him, and this time, the space between them didn't feel quite so wide. The wire pulled tight between the posts, creaking as Duncan twisted it into place. His hands moved slow but sure, thick fingers careful not to snap the brittle strands in the cold. Ivy held the post steady with her boot. Higher, she said. He adjusted without arguing. A few yards down, the fence line still sagged, but it stood straighter than it had that morning. The kind of fix that didn't look like much from a distance, but made all the difference when something leaned against it. The sun had climbed enough to warm the frost off the ground. From the house, a figure came into view. Barrett Caldwell. Even from this distance, the way he walked said everything. Sharp steps, shoulders tight. Not a man used to being caught off guard. He stopped a few paces from them, looked at the fence, then at the cattle grazing beyond it, then at Ivy. You crossed into Mercer land, he said. Duncan didn't answer right away. He finished the twist on the wire, pressed it down, then stood. They crossed first, he said. Barrett's gaze stayed on Ivy. And you thought it was your place to follow? Ivy wiped her hands on her skirt. It was my place to stop it from turning worse. A breath passed, wind moving through dry grass. Barrett's jaw tightened. You've already done enough. Duncan shifted his weight, just slightly, not stepping in front of her, not stepping away, just there. The herd's back, he said. No shots fired. That's what matters. What matters, Barrett said, voice low, is control. He took a step closer. This land runs on order, On agreement, not on improvisation. Ivy didn't move. Then maybe the agreement needed fixing, she said. The words didn't rise. They just settled. Barrett looked at Duncan then. Long. You still think this is a good idea? He asked. Duncan didn't glance at Ivy this time. I think I'd rather listen to someone who's been out here, he said, than someone who only walks it when guests are watching. That landed, not loud, but hard. Barrett let out a slow breath through his nose. For a moment, it looked like he might say more. Instead, he turned, started back toward the house. Dinner, he said over his shoulder. Tonight. We'll settle what needs settling. He didn't wait for an answer. The yard felt quieter after he left. Ivy bent to pick up the coil of spare wire. You don't have to go in there, she said. Duncan reached for the hammer, resting it against the post. I know. You don't owe him anything. No, he said. But I owe this place a clear answer. She looked at him then. Not long. Just enough to see if he meant it. He did. By the time evening came, the sky had gone flat and pale, the kind of color that held no promises. The wind had shifted colder. Inside, the long table was set again. Same plates, same polished silver, different air. Clara sat where she had before, hands folded in her lap. Her dress a soft blue this time. She didn't look at Ivy when she came in. Ivy took a place near the end, not in the shadows, just not at the center. Duncan came in last. Barrett stood at the head of the table, a folded paper in his hand. We had an understanding, he said. Before all this. He laid the paper down. A contract, clean lines, fresh ink. Land access, water rights, a future that benefits both sides. His eyes moved to Duncan. All it takes is a signature. Clara's fingers tightened, just slightly, against her skirt. Duncan didn't sit, didn't touch the paper. What if the future you're offering isn't the one this land needs? He asked. Barrett's voice sharpened. And you think you know better? I think I've seen enough to ask questions. And she gave you the answers? The room held still. Ivy's hand rested against the edge of the table. Not gripping, just there. Duncan looked at the paper once more, then pushed it back. Slow. I'm not signing something that ignores what's right in front of us, he said. Barrett's chair scraped back, hard against the floor. You're making a mistake. Maybe, Duncan said, but it'll be mine. Silence pressed in. Clara looked down. Barrett stared at him, something shifting behind his eyes. Not anger this time, but calculation slipping. The deal's off then, he said. Duncan nodded. Barrett's gaze flicked to Ivy one last time. Then he gathered the paper, folded it once, and walked out. The door shut behind him. No one spoke. After a moment, chairs moved. Quietly. One by one, the room emptied. Clara passed Ivy on her way out. Paused. Just for a second. Then kept walking. The lamp burned low. Duncan stood near the table, hands resting against the wood. Ivy rose, slow. You didn't have to do that tonight, she said. I know. That changes things. It was already changing. She stepped around the chair, headed for the door. I'll be gone before morning, she said. He didn't move. Where will you go? He asked. She paused with her hand on the latch. Somewhere that doesn't split in two because of me. Duncan reached into his coat, pulled out something small, leather worn smooth. He set it on the table. Her reins, cleaned, repaired where the strap had frayed. She turned, looked at them, then at him. I wasn't trying to keep you, he said. Just thought you should have what's yours." The room held still around them. Ivy walked back, picked up the reins, ran her thumb along the stitching. He hadn't said anything more, hadn't stepped closer, hadn't asked. "I don't need a deal," he said after a moment. "I need someone who tells me when I'm wrong, even if I don't like it." She looked up, the kind of look that didn't search for answers, just weighed them. Outside, the wind eased. Somewhere in the yard, a horse shifted against the rail. Ivy let the reins fall gently against her palm. Not leaving. Not yet. Morning came quiet. No announcement. No grand decision. Just the sound of boots on frost again. Duncan was already out by the north line, setting a new post deeper into the ground. He didn't turn when he heard the second set of steps, just held the post steady. "Bit crooked," Ivy said behind him. He smiled, faint. "Then you better fix it." She stepped beside him, took the level from his hand, set it straight. And together, they drove it in. Months later, the fence ran true along the ridge. The herd held steady through winter, smaller than before, stronger. At the edge of the property, where Caldwell land once blurred into something else, Ivy stood with a ledger in her hand, speaking low with a Mercer rider about water turns and grazing days. Duncan waited a few steps back, not interrupting. When she finished, she walked over, handed him the paper. "Sign here," she said. He took it, didn't question it, just signed. They mounted up as the light stretched long across the basin, rode side by side along the line they'd set. No words needed, just the sound of hooves on steady ground, and the kind of quiet that meant something had finally chosen to stay. Out here, nothing holds unless you tend it. Not a fence, not a herd, not a life you're trying to build with someone else. Duncan could have taken the easy road, signed a paper, stepped into a future that was already laid out for him. Clean, predictable, safe. But land doesn't lie, and neither do people who've had to fight to stand on it. Ivy never asked to be chosen. She showed up. She worked. She spoke when it mattered, even when it cost her something. And when the time came, she didn't stay because she was asked. She stayed because she decided. And maybe that's the thing most folks miss. Love out here isn't about saving someone. It's about seeing them clearly and still choosing to stand beside them when the dust settles. So if you were in his place, would you have signed the deal or walked away from everything for something uncertain but real? If this story stayed with you, there are more like it waiting down the trail. Stories about quiet choices, hard roads, and the kind of bonds that don't need words to prove they're true.